While you might think of succulents as plants that grow in the desert or in really temperate climates, there's actually a whole group of succulents that will survive a true 4-season climate with snow in the winter and warm summers. Now, you might think, oh, well, there's just a few limited varieties, but actually there are a lot of different varieties and there's a good selection of textures as well. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to these different varieties and show you some really beautiful examples of succulents that will grow well in a 4-season climate. First up, we have the most common cold hardy succulent, which is frequently called hens and chicks, but its Latin name is Sempervivum, which means to live forever or always living. And it's really appropriate for this particular type of succulent because, as the name hens and chicks indicates, it puts off a lot of new babies every year. You'll find that this succulent can put off anywhere from a couple to several dozen new babies in the spring, so it's constantly spreading and constantly putting off new life. These little chicks are put off on what's called a stolon, which is just a little stem that connects the baby plant to the mother. This allows the baby to get the nutrients it needs until it's big enough to put off roots of its own and be established in the ground. You can cut off the stolon once the succulent has put out new roots, and then you can plant the baby wherever you'd like. Once the mother plant has put off as many chicks as she possibly can, she'll put off a really beautiful bloom, and then she will die. But again, before that, she will have put off plenty of new chicks, so you won't be left with nothing. Traditional sempervivums tend to change colors throughout the year, and some will change colors more than others. Some of the factors that bring out the different colors include heat, cold, and sunlight. Depending on the time of year, you might have a succulent that's a really deep purple, but that sempervivum might change a little bit, and in the spring it might be more of a green, or generally in the summer is when they tend to have the least amount of unusual color. Green is a really common color for sempervivums, but you'll also see different tones of pinks and purples and even some bluish tones as well. The size of the individual rosettes can vary anywhere from the size of about a penny up to several inches across. It just depends on the type you're growing. While the sempervivums can get to be several inches in diameter, they still tend to be fairly low growing, so you'll want to plant them next to some taller plants to have some variety. Next up, let's talk about a different species of sempervivums called Euphylliae. This subspecies has a lot more rigid leaves, and they also tend to have a nice edge around them that glows in the sunlight. Aside from just having a thicker leaf and that nice glowing edge, Euphylliae also put off chicks a little bit differently. While a traditional sempervivum will put off chicks on the stolon, as I mentioned earlier, Euphylliae tend to form in clumps where the head of the rosette actually splits to form a new chick. In order to propagate these, you'll need to use a sterile knife to cut the rosettes apart. Once you've cut them apart, you definitely need to let them dry out and scab over before you plant them in the ground and water them. You'll also find that Euphylliae tend to have a little bit more vibrant colors than a traditional sempervivum. One of my favorites is called Lemon Sky, as it gets to be this bright yellow color. The colors in Euphylliae don't shift or change as much as a traditional sempervivum, so they tend to maintain their color a little bit better throughout the year. There's one other species of sempervivum that I want to talk about, and this one happens to be my favorite. It's also one of the hardest to find, which isn't that usually the case. The hardest to find are always our favorites. Sempervivum globiferum, or rollers as they're often called, are a little bit different than traditional sempervivums and Euphylliae. Instead of putting off chicks on a stolon like traditional sempervivums, or mounding like the Euphylliae, the globiferum tend to put off little babies on top of their leaves. They don't seem to be attached very much to the mother plant, but there is just a tiny little root-like strand that keeps it attached. Once the baby has grown large enough, it will roll off of the top of the mother plant and root somewhere else. As mentioned, these can be a little bit harder to find, but Mountain Crest Gardens does carry a few different varieties, and you can usually find them there in the spring. One thing about the Globiferum is they don't actually have as much variety in texture, shape, or color as the Euphylliae or Sempervivums. You'll find that they tend to look very similar even across the different subspecies. Now let's shift a little bit to sedums, which are another variety of cold hardy succulent. Now, there are some varieties of sedums that are not cold hardy, but ones that are generally referred to as stone crop sedums that tend to be a little bit branchier, a little bit leafier, and low growing tend to survive in 4-season climates. Sedums stay pretty low to the ground when they're growing, and they're used a lot as a ground cover because they're extremely prolific. They will spread and grow very quickly with little effort from you. However, you can also propagate them on your own just by dividing different plants and moving them somewhere else, or you can cut off the tops and plant them in the ground elsewhere. When you do cut off the tops, it'll force out some new growth on that original base plant, allowing it to be a little bit thicker and more compact. Sedums can be a really great way to cover a lot of space, but they also look really great in arrangements as well. I have found that they work really well as fillers in between some other bigger succulents, or also as a spiller, often trailing over the edge of pots or arrangements. Sedums come in quite a few different colors and textures as well, so definitely take a look around and see what options you have to work with. Now let's move into another group of succulents that tolerate snow, and these might surprise you a little bit, but most Opuntia cactus are actually cold hardy and can withstand snow. They also put off a really beautiful bloom in the spring that almost looks like a rose. The blooms are quite soft and delicate, which provides a nice contrast to the rather pointy and pokey pads of the cactus. The great thing about Opuntia cactus is you can easily remove a pad and plant it elsewhere. This makes them really easy to propagate, and you can get a lot of different varieties for a low price by just purchasing one pad of a particular cactus. You can then have a different variety of blooms in the spring while still maintaining a consistent look between the different types of paddle cactus. In the winter, Opuntias do tend to constrict and need a lot less water, so you'll find they kind of slump over and get wrinkled, and they might look like they're dying. Just know that this is a really important part of their growth cycle. They need that period of dormancy and cold to continue to put off new growth and beautiful blooms in the spring. Try not to water too much in the winter and let them just take the water naturally from the ground or from the snow that they're surrounded by. One of the great things about Opuntias is that they can get to be fairly tall, whereas Sempervivums and sedums tend to stay pretty low to the ground. As an Opuntia grows, it'll put off more pads and keep growing taller and taller, where you can almost have a tree-like cactus. This is great if you're wanting to add more height and succulents to your cold hardy garden. As I mentioned a little bit earlier in the video, one of my favorite places to shop for cold hardy succulents is mountaincrestgardens.com. They have a huge selection of different varieties, shapes, textures, and colors of cold hardy succulents, and they're one of the most diverse group that I have seen. Using cold hardy succulents is a really great way to get your succulent fix without having to take up space in your kitchen and worrying about the lack of sunlight or stretching that might cause. You'll find that combining Sempervivums and sedums can be really easy, and then Opuntias can be a great way to add some diversity, especially if you're okay with the prickly varieties. I was amazed at how well the cold hardy succulents have done growing in Utah, where we get a true 4-season climate. At one point, we had a pot of succulents that happened to be in the overflow from the rain gutter. So when the snow melted, water would come down straight into the pot, and then at night it would freeze, which left this particular pot of succulents with a really thick layer of ice on top. I was sure that was going to be the end of these succulents, but they came back bigger, better than ever the next spring and had so much beautiful color and lots of new growth. In fact, this particular arrangement grew so well that we had to massively prune back the sedums in order to see the sempervivums that were there, and we ended up pulling the sedums out completely and just leaving the sempervivums. We planted the sedums elsewhere in the ground where they had more room to spread and grow and really show off what they can do. So before you write off succulents as being only warm weather plants, take a look at these cold hardy varieties and see what will work for you where you live. You'll be really surprised at how well they do through snow and ice and whatever weather you throw at them. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and share it with all of your succulent loving friends, and I will see you next time.